this is Lisa Sherrard with Choice Flood Insurance and Carolina Flood Solutions. We're here to talk this afternoon about the future of the NFIP in today's tech-savvy world. There's a lot of changes coming down the pike with the National Flood Insurance Program. A lot of new tools have rolled out over the past couple of years with the flood insurance rate maps. And so we're going to kind of give you an overview of where we're at right now with the National Flood Insurance Program. And we'll talk about the flood maps, the new tools that are out there. And we'll also talk about FEMA's new Risk Rating 2.0, which is going to be implemented in October 1st of 2021. So let's get ready. So we're going to talk a little bit about the reauthorization. As you know, the NFIP has been extended through September 30th, 2021. This is our 16th short-term extension of the program, and we're grateful to have a year to breathe. The other ones have been a couple months, and I think with the elections and everything going on, Congress finally just decided that we need to kick the can a little bit further down the road, and we are grateful for that. So let's talk about the map updates. Everybody wants to know when we're getting new flood maps. Well, Horry County is projected to have new flood maps on June 16th, 2021. That is a projected date. We'll know here shortly if that date is going to be confirmed. It takes 6 months, so we'll know in December if that's actually going to be the date. Georgetown is went effective in March of 2018. Charleston is going effect in January 2021, January 29, 2021. And Beaufort is projected to go March 9th, 2021. These are important dates. You know, a lot of properties are going to be moving from one flood zone into another, or into, because we all live in a flood zone. Some are going to be moving from high risk to low risk, or low risk to high risk. If you're moving from a high risk flood zone into a lower risk flood zone, such as a VE to an AE or an AE to an X, you're going to want to contact your insurance agent when that map change comes. It's going to take them about 30 to 60 days to get through the updates on the maps, but you can request a refund on your current flood insurance premium for that year. So that's a big deal. And it's also going to make houses more marketable. I have one house I was quoting yesterday. The premium's about $4,000 today. And come January, it's going to be $400. So it's a big difference in flood insurance premiums. So if you have listings out there, you're going to need to recheck those listings once those maps are released, because the flood maps do change, the zones are changing, the mandatory purchase requirements are going to be changing. So you want to make sure that you have everything up to date on your listings to convey to a buyer what changes have been made and how it impacts that property. Again, if it's going from a higher risk to a lower risk flood zone, that's a big deal. And that would make the house more appealable. So flood insurance, do some homework. Risk Rating 2.0. Just want to say about the do your homework. Flood insurance policies are not written correctly sometimes. Sometimes there's a mistake in the policy, and it'll get discovered 30 days after closing. So make sure that you have the policies reviewed, make sure that the rating characteristics on it make sense, that the declaration page makes sense. So have it reviewed by a professional or an agent, and just to make sure everything is correct. If it says it has a basement, it has a crawl space, then you might want to say, well, that's a flag. So just take a look at the policies, have someone look at it. We're happy to look at them for you. To make sure that they are correct. So let's spend a little bit of time on the Risk Rating 2.0. FEMA has come up with this system to compete with the private market in a way to deliver fair rates, reflecting the true cost to rebuild. You know, over time in the 1950s, the average square foot of a house was 1,200 square feet. 1970, it was 1,500 square feet. And in the year 2000 and now, the square footage of the houses has grown. The materials have changed. You know, the cost of a house in 1950, you know, the materials that were used then are not the materials that were used today. So the replacement cost value of those homes are somewhat more expensive, but the square footage is smaller. So over time, FEMA's looking at now using replacement cost value as a factor. It's been a factor in V-zone rating for quite a while, but the agents have not always properly filled that out because they knew that the maximum amount of insurance available was $250. So a lot of people just put $250. A lot of agents just put $250 as the replacement cost value. That's going to be considered when we go to risk rating 2.0 in October 2021. So the intent of, you know, risk rating 2.0 is to reduce the complexity of, you know, quoting or writing an insurance policy by eliminating the elevation certificates and simplifying the premium discount rules. The second thing it's going to do is make an investment in mitigation. They're going to be expanding mitigation credits and expanding CRS. And then we're also going to be looking at inequities, leveraging more information, reflecting prior claims data, and like I said, recalculating and factoring the cost to rebuild. Well, how are we going to be able to determine what the replacement cost value is? Well, there's going to be a program built in that the agent will use to calculate replacement cost value. They're going to have a map. They're going to ask the agent to draw a square around the building that, you know, that we're insuring so that we can get a clear, indicator of which building on the property is being insured. So there's a lot of stuff going into this. And these factors are looking at distance to water, elevation relative to the flood source, the topography, the USGS stream order. The structural variables, again, are the replacement cost value, the structure to rebuild, the type of foundation, and the first floor height. They're going to look at counting steps instead of requiring an elevation certificate. And that's going to be an interesting way of doing this. A lot of the private policies are doing some of this now, but it's really taking into just more than is it in or out of a flood hazard area. Again, elevation certificates are not going to be required. Replacement costs will be automatically calculated by FEMA. It's going to have a huge impact in a V or VE flood zone insured property in year one if the replacement cost value was not calculated properly. Misrated policies will be adjusted accordingly and will not be subject to the caps. It'll eliminate non-statutory programs. So, for example, grandfathering is a non-statutory flood program. So grandfathering is being done away with. They're going to increase caps, apply unless they are misrating. So in other words, your policy is going to go up 15 to 18% as it currently does. Unless there is a misrating, a CRS discount change, if it's a severe repetitive loss property or it's non-primary. So let's look at classifications. You know, this is the national impact by class. We have 618,440 pre-firm subsidized policies. We have 146,011 grandfather policies, full risk rate policies, and PRP or other flood zones. There's 2 million, almost 2.1 million or 2.7 million, a little over that. And that makes up the bulk of 78.1% of the policies in the book. The grandfather policies are only 4.2% of the portfolio for single family. And, you know, grandfather's been very important in keeping insurance rates lower. So it's going to be interesting to see how they handle this. I have to say FEMA has been very quiet about what factors are going into the risk rating 2.0. They're not sharing a lot of information with us. The people they do share are under a non-disclosure agreement, so they can't know. So we're really not going to know until possibly March or April of next year what the changes are going to be and how they're going to impact our clients, which is unfortunate. So if you look at the pre-firm subsidized, we have 393,700, 11.3% of the homes. Those average premium is $2,334. And the analysis from, on these pre-firm policies indicates pre-firm policies have been paying some of the highest premiums in the NFIP since we did not know what the risk was. And FEMA cannot determine the full risk rate without them purchasing an elevation certificate. Under risk rating 2.0, an elevation certificate will not be required, and they will be able to calculate the risk based on the number of steps. So that'll be a savings for flood insurance policyholders in some areas. In most places, we've been able to get where we have gotten an elevation certificate. It hasn't had an impact on the flood insurance where an elevation certificate was applied. And in some cases, it's not. It's really just a crapshoot. Depending upon when the house was built and how high it was built up. The national rate class information for newly mapped. Newly mapped is where they're just gone into a flood zone from X to AE, and they have a 5-year glide path into paying full risk rate premiums until they get an elevation certificate. And really there's no analysis, no negative change on this. It'll kind of go the same way that it has. Looking at grandfathering, this is kind of an interesting thing. FEMA has decided to do away with the grandfathering, but they've also said that it's going to be continuous coverage. You're going to be subject to the caps. So you're going to be going up to 15 to 18% a year. The grandfathering discounts can be transferred upon change of ownership. But again, they haven't really told us how they're going to do away with it if they're still, they're not going to recognize it. So I think you're still subject to the caps at this point, but those rates will be going up. Preferred risk policies and other, you're looking at, 1.7 million policies, or 49% of the homes. The average premium is $470. These people, this group, this subset is paying less than what the full risk rate requires. So this subset is going to be going up. They will be increasing the PRP rates. And I have to tell you, anybody who buys a policy prior to September, the end of August, 1st of September, you're going to get the benefit for 1 year, and you'll be on a glide path for under the cap. You'll be covered under the standard rates where they can't cover you. They can't increase you more than the 15 to 18%. If you buy after September 1st, you have that 30-day wait. Your policy will be effective October 1st. Then you're going to be included in the risk rating 2.0, and the rates are going to be higher. So if you don't have a flood insurance policy, make sure you have one in place by August. And that would be very, very helpful. So our current class information for coastal high hazard areas, we have 14,279 or 0.4% of the homes with the average premium about $5,300. Those properties are discounted. Those premiums are discounted. For some of these properties, it's going to decrease under risk rating 2.0. Some of them it's going to go up. Again, it's proximity to water is what they're looking at, and the height, the flood protection. So let's look at the FEMA flood insurance rate maps, and we'll show you how to make a flood insurance, what we call a ferment. So when you're looking at this address here, let's pull this up here. Waiting for it to load here. This always takes a little bit of time. Are there any questions of any of the material we've gone through so far, Michael?
Yeah, we have one. Who will be calculating replacement costs? Are pre-firm policies going to Accurity rates?
So Yeah, actuarial. So the agent will calculate replacement cost value in the system. So FEMA's going to automatically calculate it when they get there. You know, when risk rating 2.0 goes over, they will automatically recalculate. Let's see if that does any better. They're going to automatically recalculate it for you.
For clarity, someone asked, when you say agent, you mean insurance agent, right?
Right, the insurance agent. That is correct. Sorry about that.
We also have one more question. Someone was asking if you know the timing for flood map changes for Dorchester, Berkeley counties.
Not yet. The Berkeley County and Dorchester were done a couple of years ago, so they're pretty new. So it looks like we're having trouble here on the internet. Well, it doesn't look like that's going to go through. So let's just go back to the presentation. We'll talk about it. When you know, if the FEMA is basically a flood map that you can type in an address, and it's going to give you an option to produce a flood, what we call flood insurance rate map on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. It's relatively simple to do. You can go to this address right here, www.msc.fema.gov, type in the address, and it's going to show you where the property is, and it's going to ask you if you'd like to make a ferment. And it's relatively simple to do. It gives you an 8.5 piece of paper with the property shown. It's very simple to do. So when you look at Realtor.com, let's see if we can get to Realtor.com. So when we type in this address here, 111 Greenbrier Road, it comes up as being what we call in Realtor.com. They have this new thing for the flood map. And it comes up as being zone AE. And this is pretty controversial. This data on Realtor.com is not based on whether it's in or out of the flood hazard area. It is an approximation. They give you a flood factor rating that looks at past, present, and future risk for the home by identifying risks from rain, rivers, tides, storm surge, and at other advanced modeling techniques, but it's not structure specific. It could be a neighborhood because the claims data is confidential. So they don't know who made the claim or if there was ever a claim made on the property. They don't have an elevation certificate on the property. They're not looking to see if a letter of map amendment was issued. And so the data is a generalization and it is not guaranteed. So for this property, it came up, says AE flood zone within a special flood hazard area, and it indicates that it's a high risk. The FEMA risk model is based on historic flood patterns, covers a general area, not an individual property. It's also used to determine insurance and building code requirements. Well, the interesting thing is if you go to FEMA's website and look up this property, you'll find that it is not in a flood hazard zone because a letter of map amendment was issued. Well, if there's misinformation on this site, how do you get it corrected? You can't. You can appeal the decision, but they will only correct it at the next batch, which is quarterly. So it could be 3 to 6 months, depending upon when you hit it and they approve it and the next batch hits. So it's good information from a risk standpoint to make people aware of flood hazard in the area, but having it tied to a specific property could be cumbersome if it's not accurate. So the disclaimers at the bottom in small print say that this is data is provided by Flood Factor. It's approximate flood risk and not intended to include all possible risks. It is a probable estimated risk. And they'll give you a flood insurance quote, but it's a non-binding quote or an offer to, it's not a contract for insurance. Can be, changed or withdrawn for any reason. And so there's a whole other caveat of things you get into. I don't recommend you using this for the purposes of determining whether or not your listings are in or out, because it takes into other factors other than the flood insurance rate map. which is what the determining factor is. So this property here is in an X zone or X500 flood zone, and flood insurance is not required. This is the same property that we just saw that said that it was in an AE flood zone based on the Realtor.com, and it was also had it at a high risk rating. And then this is a map determination that comes from either the lender or the, you can get it from your insurance agent. These are offered for free through us. If you go to our website, you can get one of these and it tells you whether it's in or out. And it gives you here that tells you that there was a letter of map amendment issued right down here. Part of the property is still in the flood hazard area, but the structure is not. So those are important things to look at. So the firm, the FEMA source, the FEMA Map Service Center is the definitive source, whether or not it's in a flood hazard area. It's easy to print that format out for the file. It's an 8.5 by piece of paper. And Realtor.com is a marketing tool and not an approximation and not a guaranteed determination of whether or not the property is in or out. It's also not going to keep up with the map changes. So if the map change goes into effect, it'll be the next batch cycle before that update is made. There's another website here called Flood Tracker, and it'll let you see all the flood maps, where we're at in the mapping stage. This is just an example here. Shows you what counties are under change and where they're at in the process. There's a thing called a preliminary map comparison tool. So if you want to know what flood zone you were in before and where you're at now, you can go to this website here. If the preliminary map has been issued, like in Charleston County is, the map's been issued and it's been gone through that process. We're in that final 6-month process. They pull the preliminary maps from the website. So you'd have to go to the county GIS at that point to look at the preliminary maps if you want to look at them digitally. But this is a pretty cool determination here because it shows you, as a close-up, the effective firm, and this effect, the little dots here means that we really don't have a digital layer for this, so we can't tell you, but we'll tell you what map panel it is, so you can go look it up on the paper maps. They did not have a digital version of the paper map to put up here on FEMA's website. And then you can see the preliminary maps. The interesting thing in this area, the base flood elevation is dropping 4 feet. And so that's a significant drop in BFE for this property. So the preliminary maps will be effective in January 29. The insured will apply for a refund and will be granted. I got to tell you something, your insurance agents are not going to process a refund without you asking for it. If you're one of my clients, we process them automatically, but they won't process a refund. They'll just give you the new rate at renewal. So it's very important, if you want your refund back, that you contact your agent after the map changes, because that's the only time they can process the refunds, is after the map becomes effective. So pay attention to those dates. So one of the things we're also talking about is coastal barrier resource areas. Those are those areas that have been mapped by U.S. Fish and Wildlife that want to leave undeveloped. There are areas along the South Carolina coast that flood insurance is not available. We run into them from time to time, but they used to be shown on the flood insurance rate map, the areas that where flood insurance was not available. Those areas are no longer shown on new firms. So the standard flood hazard determination form doesn't have that information either. So you have to go through and manually look that up through a separate validation tool, and there's the address for this. Federally backed flood insurance is not available in areas that are mapped by Coastal Barrier Resource Center. They'll give you a printout. That you can use. Let's see if we can pull this one up. There we go. You can use this tool here, and you can click on here. You'll put the address in, and it will, to put your address in.
Hey, Lisa, we can't see that window for some reason.
You can't see it?
No.
That's odd. Let me see if I can share that. Does it require me to share?
Yeah, you might have to go down to share screen and just select the window.
Okay. How does that look? Can you see that now?
Yep, now we can see it.
Okay, great. So you would just go in here and you can see all this orange down here, or where we call areas that they want undeveloped. So if you scroll in to look at South Carolina, you can see that there are pockets along the South Carolina coast where they don't want development to occur. These areas are where flood insurance is not available for sale within that jurisdiction. You can go up here and you can type in an address and find a location, and it'll give you a nice little printed map for you to stick in your file. Let's see if we can do the FEMA Flood Hazard Map Service Center now. Well, how about that? So let's look at an address here. I'll pull one up here. Let's see. Just a second. There we go. Looks like it tucked in twice there. Let's see, Sand Dollar. And that's in Myrtle Beach. Let's see if we can find that. So you can see we found the property right here. And what we want to do, you want to make sure you've got the right house. Can everyone see that? Let's see, let me scroll down here. Can everyone see that there? So you want to make sure you have the right house. You want to go pinpoint the right house. And then what we do, we're going to make it what we call a ferment. And see, it gives you this version of map right here so that you can see. To make the ferment, you want to identify the property area. Just go over here, click a ferment. You want to drag this little pink square to where you want to be. And once you're done there, you just want to click make a PDF. And see, it gives you a nice little record for your file here. Can everyone see that? And it gives you your scale. You can see the roads, base flood elevations, and things like that. So that's a simple way to document why you made a decision whether or not it was in the flood hazard area or not. Any questions on that?
Doesn't look like there's any questions right now.
Okay, very good. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. So we talked about the coastal barrier resource areas. They're not shown on the flood insurance maps now. So it's important for us to.
I didn't get that. Could you try it again?
Sorry. So they're not shown on there. So I'm also going to pull the realtor.com up too. And let's see if we can look at that. So I'll just type an address in. We can look at this one right here. This one here, if you come down here where it tells you the FEMA flood zone, the flood risk rating factor, you can see it in this area of the screen here. Again, these are approximations and not final determinations. And it tells you that in the disclaimers. But it tells you flood risk is constant. It has a flood risk rating factor of 4, but that does not mean it's not going to flood. So the other thing is with the disclosure form that went out in January, a lot of people are being asked now to disclose if they've ever had a flood insurance claim on their property. These claims data is not available to the general public, and it must be initiated by the property owner. They can call this telephone number or email this address here to get a copy of the flood insurance claims data for that particular property. It will go through the lifetime of the house, and that's very important. Some people buy houses and don't realize, we've had this in the past, where they buy a house and the premium's really cheap, and then all of a sudden the next year they're like $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a year. And so how do you get out of that? And the only way to get out of that is to either get an elevation certificate. If it's a severe repetitive loss property, your options are to elevate. I have one client who was paying their over $9,000 a year. Now their premium's about $300, but they chose to elevate the house. So it is something that does happen, but it's always best to get the claims data ahead of time with this new requirement for disclosure forms to go ahead and request that claims data. FHA loans, we have new private flood. FHA is in rulemaking right now to allow private flood insurance policies. That's been something we've been kind of stuck with. We have not been able to utilize the private market for FHA loans because of the Bigger Waters Act and the prior act on the 1994. They required NFIP policies. So FHA is now rulemaking to allow private flood. Private flood is a crapshoot. There's some areas you can get private flood and some areas you can't. They're looking at the same thing FEMA is going to start looking at, and that is proximity to water. So with private flood, you'll find that you'll end up with a quote higher than the NFIP. That's a nice way of saying we don't want to write this, but if you really want to pay a higher premium, we'll give you a private flood insurance policy, or they won't write it at all. They'll say we don't write in this area. Private flood, unlike the National Flood Insurance Program, can cancel you at any time for any reason. They may decide that they don't want to write in this zip code anymore. Then your choice is to go back to the NFIP. The NFIP has not been fixed with regards to lapsing coverage. So if you have an NFIP flood insurance policy and you go to the private market, and the private market, whatever reason, drops you, or you decide to drop the private policy and you go back to the NFIP, you have what we call like a pre-existing condition with healthcare. They're going to say, well, you had a policy in place, you dropped it, and you have a mortgage. If you come back to us, now you're going to pay a higher rate. So you lose any benefit to grandfathering or anything. So I always say weigh the long-term costs of a private flood policy versus a NFIP back policy before you make the move, because it's absolutely critical in knowing what you're getting. You don't want to jump the ship and then realize that you made a mistake long term. So ask a lot of questions about the private flood insurance policies. They're not all created equal. You need to make sure that your lender will accept a private flood policy before you purchase it, because not all flood insurance policies are created equal. I see we have a question. Michael?
Yeah, we have a couple questions.
Okay.
But I think this is this person was just asking if there's a way that you could if you could go over how to read an elevation certificate.
Sure. Let me stop sharing. I'll pull an elevation certificate up for you. You'll give me just 1 second.
We also have a couple more questions in the
Okay.
chat that we could go through after.
Yeah, go ahead and ask me while I'm pulling this up, okay?
Okay, perfect. So let's see. So we've got someone mentioned that they went to the msc.fema.gov website and their house in North Myrtle Beach just moved here last week. And the house shows it hasn't been updated since August 23rd of 99 and no digital data available.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're wondering where they would get the data.
Well, the map service center, there's a paper map. So if you go to the map service center, there's a way for you to print a paper map. So if they click on make a format or to look at the format, it'll take them to the paper map and they can find their house on that paper map.
Okay. We've got another person who said, when you talk about proximity to water, what types of water are they looking at? Oceans, rivers, ponds, stream, lake, wetlands?
Any water source. Any water source.
We've got a couple more questions here. Are pre-firm policies losing subsidies?
Pre-firm policies are not losing subsidies per se yet. They haven't really told us how they're going to handle this. They're going to be pre-firm subsidized is in the statute. So it's required by statute. Grandfathering is not. So that's FEMA feels that they can remove things that are not statutory. Okay. So
And
this is, go ahead.
I was just gonna, we've got one more here. And I think this was from earlier a slide. And they were asking if the premiums listed were monthly or annual premiums.
They're annual premiums. All flood insurance premiums are annual. So somebody asked me about the elevation certificate. Here is an elevation certificate, and I just pulled up the first one I saw. This one's in Delaware. You can see here, can you see this? We have the square footage of the enclosure. We have, this one does not have an attached garage. This is all the information here with regards to the base flood elevation. It's 12, the flood zone. And your elevations in section C are really what matter. Section C2A is the bottom of the basement, crawl space, or floor enclosure. So that's the ground underneath the main living level. The next higher floor, in this case, would be the first living floor or entrance foyer. C2B is for a V zone property, that would be filled out. That's the lowest horizontal structural member. And then this case here, we have no attached garage. Have the level of the equipment servicing the building. We have a lowest adjacent grade. We have a highest adjacent grade, and then we have the lowest adjacent grade with the stairs or deck, including structural support. So when FEMA looks at a letter of map amendment, they're going to look to see that C2H and C2F are above the base flood elevation. So this one would not qualify for a letter of map amendment. Did that answer your question on the elevation certificate?
I'll let you know once they put it in. We've got another person. I think it was a follow-up to when you were talking about the subsidies.
Sure.
And they said, what's the difference?
The difference between a subsidized premium and a non-subsidized premium is based on the date of construction. So if it's an older house, it's typically subsidized unless an elevation certificate would provide it with a better rating. Structures that are built in compliance with the flood insurance rate map or after the flood insurance rate map was developed and published are going to be considered post-firm, and those are not subsidized.
Okay, it looks like he clarified what's the difference between subsidized and grandfathering.
Okay, subsidizing grandfathering, we can grandfather for two reasons. One would be continuous coverage, and the other one would be built in compliance. Pre-firm structures could be grandfathered pre-firm subsidized structures could be grandfathered if they had a policy for a place in years and there was a lower base flood elevation at some time or a different flood zone at some time during the policy history. You have to have continuous coverage, so the policy could never have lapsed. So you may benefit from a lower flood zone or a lower BFE for that time period, for time in the past. For building compliance, your house was built either in a AE flood zone or a lower BFE or an X zone, and those you're given a preferential rate based on the date of construction and the flood zone and base flood elevation in time that was in place at the time of construction. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, it looks like I think we got them all.
Okay, good. So if this is you, if you're frustrated, you can't figure it out, you get on the phone, you're like, what am I supposed to do? And you're drowning in all the tech data, just call us for help. We're here to help you. This is our contact information. If you have questions, we give you free flood zone determinations. You just go on our website and you can put them in there, your address in yourself. And it's very, very simple. We are writing in and out of flood insurance in and out of South Carolina. We do consulting work. So we're out to help you solve problems. We're here to help you. Just give us a call. Our telephone number is 803-865-4297. And our website is www.simplyflood.com. That's simplyflood.com. And again, my name is Lisa Sherrard. It's been a pleasure being with you today. I'm on the Independent Agent and Brokers Association, National Flood Insurance Task Force. And so we're staying up to date what's going on. We appreciate you allowing us to come today. We have a few more minutes for questions.
Lisa, do you by chance have, I don't know if you have the links to the tools that you showed today. Do you have those on your website anywhere?
We don't, but we will make this presentation available to you as a handout, so they'll be able to get them.
Okay, so we'll plan on everyone who has registered for this. We'll send out a copy of the presentation with those links as a follow-up email. So are there any other questions? Yeah, I think that's it right now. So.
Okay, great.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, Lisa. And everyone, just remember, if you want to view a recording of this webinar, it will be posted on our YouTube channel. You could get there by going to youtube.com/screaltors.
Fantastic. Thank you again for having me, and everyone have an enjoyable afternoon.